The white envelope trembled slightly in Dr. Phil's hands. The studio, normally alive with energy, had gone completely silent. Every camera operator, every audience member, every producer behind the glass held their breath. In his 20 years of broadcasting, Dr. Phil had never stopped mid-show like this. But what he was about to read would change two lives forever. What happened next became one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. It had started 3 weeks earlier. Sarah Mitchell, 34, a single mother from Ohio, had submitted an urgent request to the Dr. Phil show. Her story seemed straightforward. She was searching for her biological father, a man she'd never met. Her mother had passed away the previous year, taking most of the story to her grave. All Sarah had was a name, a faded photograph from 1989, and a desperate need for answers. "My mother told me he didn't want to be found," Sarah had said in her pre-interview. "But I need to know where I come from. My daughter deserves to know her heritage." The show's research team had done what they do best. They found him. Robert Chen, 56, a high school teacher in California. When producers contacted him, his reaction was unexpected. "I don't know any Sarah Mitchell," he'd said on the phone, genuinely confused. "I've never been to Ohio. There must be some mistake." But he'd agreed to take a DNA test anyway. "If this woman needs closure," he'd told the producer, "I'll help prove I'm not who she's looking for." Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. The day of the taping arrived. Sarah sat in the guest chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She'd brought her daughter Emma, 12, who waited backstage with the producer. Sarah had insisted Emma shouldn't be there, just in case it goes badly. Dr. Phil opened the show with his characteristic directness. "Sarah, you've been searching for your father for 16 years. You've hit dead ends, false leads, and closed doors. Today, we may finally have answers." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Her entire body was tense with anticipation and fear. "Now, your mother told you your father's name was Robert Chen. She showed you one photograph. She said he was a college student she met at Ohio State in 1989. Is that correct?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. She said they dated for 3 months. When she told him she was pregnant, he left. She said he didn't want anything to do with us. The audience murmured sympathetically. This was familiar territory for the show. Absent fathers, abandoned children, the search for identity and belonging. Dr. Phil turned to the other guest chair, where Robert Chen sat looking genuinely bewildered. "Robert, you've told our producers you've never been to Ohio State. You went to UCLA. You've never dated anyone named Mitchell. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Robert said firmly but gently. "Dr. Phil, I feel terrible for Sarah's situation, but I think there's been a mistake. I've never even been to Ohio." Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. "Hold on," Dr. Phil said, raising his hand. He turned to face the camera directly, a move that broke standard show protocol. "We ran the DNA test 3 days ago. The results came back yesterday. Our production team verified them twice. What I'm about to share with you, this is not what anyone expected." The audience leaned forward collectively. Sarah's breathing became rapid and shallow. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A production assistant approached with a white envelope. Dr. Phil took it but didn't open it immediately. "Before I read these results," Dr. Phil said, his voice lower and more serious than usual, "I need both of you to understand something. The truth, whatever it is about to change your lives. Sarah, you came here looking for your father. Robert, you came here to prove you're not him. But sometimes, the truth is more complicated than we imagine." He opened the envelope slowly. His eyes scanned the first page. Then the second. His expression, usually so controlled, shifted noticeably. "Stop the tape," Dr. Phil said suddenly. The command was so unexpected that it took the control room a moment to react. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Dr. Phil as he stepped away from the guests, walked to the edge of the stage, and spoke directly to his executive producer in the booth. "I need to talk to both of them separately before we continue," he said quietly but firmly. This is bigger than what we discussed. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." The audience watched in confusion as Dr. Phil conferred with his team. Sarah began to cry, not knowing what was happening. Robert stood up, looking concerned. "Dr. Phil?" Sarah called out. "Please, just tell me. I can handle it." Dr. Phil returned to the stage. He sat down on the coffee table between the two guest chairs, an intimate gesture he reserved for the most serious moments. "Sarah, Robert," he began. "The DNA test confirmed something remarkable. Robert is not your father." Sarah's face crumpled. "I knew it," she sobbed. "I knew it was too good to be true." "Wait," Dr. Phil said, holding up his hand. "I'm not finished." He looked at Robert. "Robert, you're not her father. But according to these results, you are her uncle." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "What?" Sarah gasped. Robert's jaw literally dropped. That's impossible. I don't have any siblings who..." He stopped mid-sentence. His face went pale. "Dr. Phil," Robert said slowly, "I was adopted when I was 3 months old. I've never met my biological parents. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming." Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Robert, according to these results, you and Sarah share approximately 25% of your DNA. That's consistent with an aunt-uncle or grandparent-grandchild relationship. But given the age difference, the most likely explanation is that Sarah's biological father is your biological brother." Sarah and Robert stared at each other, as if seeing one another for the first time. "I have a brother?" Robert whispered. "My father has been looking for you," Sarah said, the realization dawning on her face. Dr. Phil pulled out another document. "After we got these preliminary results, our team worked around the clock. We contacted the adoption agency that placed you, Robert. We cross-referenced records. And we found something." He handed Robert a photocopy of an old document. "In 1968, a woman named Margaret Chen gave birth to twin boys in San Francisco. She was 17 years old. She kept one baby, who she named David. She placed the other baby, you, Robert, for adoption." Robert's hands shook as he read the document. "David Chen," Dr. Phil continued, "moved to Ohio in 1987 to attend Ohio State. He graduated in 1991. He married in 1995. And Sarah, he's been looking for you too." "What?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. Dr. Phil nodded to the production assistant. "Bring him in." The side door to the studio opened. A man in his 50s walked onto the stage. He had Robert's eyes, Robert's nose, Robert's gentle smile. Sarah stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. "Dad?" David Chen's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah." They met in the middle of the stage, and the embrace was so raw, so genuine, that half the audience was openly crying. But then David turned and saw Robert. The two brothers stood 5 feet apart, mirror images separated by decades. "I didn't know," David said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know I had a brother." "Neither did I," Robert replied. Dr. Phil stepped back, letting the moment breathe. The cameras captured it all. Sarah sobbing in her father's arms, the two brothers slowly approaching each other, the audience completely undone by the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. When the show resumed, Dr. Phil brought out Emma from backstage. The 12-year-old's reaction to meeting her grandfather and great-uncle simultaneously was perhaps even more powerful than the initial revelation. "We ran extensive verification," Dr. Phil explained to the camera, his professional demeanor restored but his voice still thick with emotion. "We contacted Margaret Chen, who is still alive at 74. She confirmed everything. She confirmed that she'd been told her babies would be placed together, but the agency separated them. She's been carrying that guilt for 56 years. He turned to David. Tell us what happened with Sarah. David, still holding his daughter's hand, spoke quietly. Her mother, Jennifer, and I dated for 5 months, not 3. When she got pregnant, I was terrified. I was 22, barely employed, drowning in student loans. I told her I needed time to think. He paused, wiping his eyes. When I came back 2 weeks later to tell her I wanted to be there, to be a father, she was gone. Moved out of her apartment. Changed her number. I searched for years, Sarah. I never stopped looking. She told me you didn't want me, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I wanted you more than anything, David replied. I just needed 2 weeks to get my head straight. And it cost me 34 years. Dr. Phil addressed the camera. Jennifer Mitchell passed away last year, so we'll never know why she told Sarah that her father abandoned them. But what we do know is this: 3 people who thought they were alone in the world just discovered their family. He turned to Robert. You've spent your whole life wondering about your biological family. You're a teacher. You help kids every day. And today, you discovered you have a twin brother and a niece. Robert, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke. I teach biology, he said with a slight laugh through his tears. I teach about genetics and heredity and DNA. And I never imagined. He looked at David. I never imagined I'd be part of a textbook example. The audience laughed and cried simultaneously. Here's what happens next, Dr. Phil said, shifting into his action mode. Margaret Chen has agreed to a reunion. She lives in a nursing home in San Francisco, and she wants to meet all 3 of you. Our show will facilitate that reunion and cover all travel expenses. He looked at Sarah. You came here looking for a father. You found a father and an uncle. Your daughter found a grandfather and a great-uncle. That's not a mistake. That's a miracle. The show went to commercial break, but the cameras kept rolling for another 20 minutes as the family talked, cried, and began to process what had happened. Later, Dr. Phil would tell his wife Robin that it was one of the most profound moments of his career. You plan for certain outcomes, he'd say. You prepare for emotional responses. But you can never fully prepare for the moment when science and human longing intersect to create something extraordinary. The episode aired 6 weeks later and became the most watched Dr. Phil episode of the season. It sparked conversations about adoption, about the importance of DNA testing, about the power of persistence and hope. But more than that, it reminded millions of viewers of a simple truth: family isn't just who you know. Sometimes it's who you don't know yet. 6 months later, an update segment showed David, Robert, and Sarah together at Margaret's bedside in San Francisco. The elderly woman, facing her final months, wept as she held both of her sons' hands for the first time since they were infants. I thought I'd die with this regret, Margaret said on camera. I thought I'd never see them again. Thank you, Dr. Phil. Thank you for giving me this gift. She passed away 3 weeks after that reunion, surrounded by the family she thought she'd lost forever. Dr. Phil kept the white envelope from that episode in his office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. That envelope contained 3 pieces of paper. He'd later reflect. But what it really contained was the answer to decades of questions. It contained healing. It contained connection. And it proved something I've always believed: the truth, no matter how complicated, is always worth pursuing. The story didn't end there. David and Robert became close as brothers separated for 56 years could become. They discovered shared interests, similar mannerisms, even the same terrible jokes. Sarah and Emma became part of both families, celebrated at holidays, welcomed at birthdays. And every year on the anniversary of that taping, the 3 of them, David, Robert, and Sarah, would send Dr. Phil the same text message: thank you for not giving up on the truth. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is hold a white envelope, pause mid-show, and have the courage to reveal what's inside, even when no one, not even you, knows exactly what will happen next. The impact of that single episode rippled far beyond the studio walls. In the weeks following the broadcast, the show received over 50,000 messages from viewers. Adoption agencies reported a 300% increase in inquiries about reunion services. DNA testing companies saw their sales spike. But more importantly, families across America began having conversations they'd been avoiding for years. Dr. Phil's production team received a particularly moving letter from a woman in Texas. "I watched your show with my adopted son," she wrote. "He's been afraid to search for his birth family, worried it would hurt me. After seeing your episode, he asked if I'd help him look. We found his biological mother last week. Thank you for showing us that love doesn't divide, it multiplies." The episode won a Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Talk Show. But during his acceptance speech, Dr. Phil didn't talk about production values or storytelling techniques. He talked about Sarah, David, and Robert. "Television at its best doesn't just entertain," he said from the stage. "It connects. It heals. It reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles or our searches." That white envelope I held that day contained more than test results. It contained hope. And hope, as it turns out, is the most powerful force in the universe. Years later, the legacy of that moment continues. Robert Chen retired from teaching but now volunteers with an organization that helps adoptees search for biological families. David Chen wrote a book about his journey, with proceeds going to adoption reunion nonprofits. Sarah Mitchell became a DNA counselor, helping others navigate the emotional complexity of genetic testing. And Emma, the 12-year-old who met her grandfather on live television, is now studying genetics in college. "I want to help families find each other," she told a reporter. "Just like Dr. Phil helped mine." The white envelope still sits in Dr. Phil's office, now framed alongside a photograph from Margaret Chen's bedside reunion. Visitors often ask about it, and he tells them the same thing every time. "That's the day I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do as a host is stop hosting and just be human."